Mike Gallagher.
And that's important. Declassified with Julie Kelly. People talk about Substack. I had somebody tell me a couple weeks ago, there's no more important contributor and participant in the Substack world than Julie Kelly. So thanks for letting us know. Declassified with Julie Kelly, right? Declassified.live?
Yes. Thank you, Mike. Correct.
Yes. You bet. Thanks for the correction, Julie. I appreciate you so much. And look, let's start with, I asked a simple question, and people are giving me lots of answers. What is the proper punishment for breaking a window at the Capitol? What is the proper punishment for assaulting a police officer if you do it out of frustration, as a caller tried to say a moment ago, over George Floyd, or frustration over the outcome of an election? This whole thing is impossible to keep up with. Give me your take on where these defendants and these January 6ers are now, and what you give us a 35,000-foot view of the way this whole process has gone with President Trump's clemency for 1,500 of them.
So, Mike, it's really important to emphasize that this is not how clashes with police in the nation's capital or even vandalism is handled in Washington, D.C. Breaking a window at the Capitol or breaking a window on government property is a misdemeanor in Washington, especially if it results in less than $1,000 and you get charged locally, and usually sort of a slap on the wrist. You're not sent to federal prison for years. Assaults on police officers also always handled by the Superior Court in Washington, which is the local court, not the federal courthouse. Same with these misdemeanors. You know, Mike, early on, the Chief Judge Beryl Howell said she wasn't sure how to deal with the most common misdemeanor, which is parading at the Capitol. She said, this is a petty offense, a Class B misdemeanor. We never handle these, but nonetheless went ahead forward, handling them, refusing to dismiss that count, and sending people to prison on that. So if you get in a scuffle with a police officer in the course of a political demonstration in Washington, and you shove a police officer, you're screaming at a police officer, you grab his baton or his riot shield, yes, that should definitely result in some sort of punishment, but it's never handled this way. You don't end up in a federal prison for years. Is a veteran who is a former law enforcement official with a clean criminal record like Thomas Webster, who got into a scuffle with police because that officer, DC Metro, was shoving a woman down the stairs outside of the Capitol, not even inside. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. There is no comparison how the court system and the DOJ has handled J6 protesters, not only in Washington, across the country, Mike. That's why it was such a courageous and compassionate move by the president to pardon everyone, because he recognized how unfair these trials were, the proceedings from the very beginning, and that these people finally deserve justice and to be made whole. And that's exactly what the president did on Monday.
Do you agree with Axios's reporting that Trump, his sweeping pardons for the 1,500 January 6ers were kind of a last-minute rip-the-bandage off decision to try to move past the issue quickly? In fact, behind the scenes, according to a source to Axios, President Trump kind of said, look, we're going case by case. The team wrestled with the issue, and Trump finally said, blanket, release them all. Do you think that's accurate reporting?
I do. And Mike, I did speak with the president last week for about 40 minutes as he was trying to get some granular, grasp on exactly what the latest was with the J6 prosecution. He understands how unfair, like I said, he's been meeting with these families for over 2 years. He's heard their horror stories. He's met with the children of defendants and how this has destroyed their lives. And so he feels very personally about it. And so, yes, rip the Band-Aid off, because why continue this painful process? Put it in the lap of Attorney General Pam Bondi. This was the right thing to do. And now he's getting pushback from media, even conservative media, shamefully the Wall Street Journal, with a really egregious editorial today, regurgitating talking points from the Department of Justice, talking about how he shouldn't have pardoned these individuals. So he is getting pushback. He was getting resistance to this, but he did the right thing. And this also has completely covered up Joe Biden's last minute pardons, right? So the media is not asking these Republican senators about Joe Biden pardoning the entire J6 committee, the members and the staffers and the 4 lying, crying police officers, not asking about pardoning his brother and sister-in-law and members of his family. They're only worried about someone who's pardoned for getting in a fight with a police officer 4 years ago. Our media is an absolute disgrace. The conservative media also is a disgrace, and these Republican senators speaking out against it as well. They have no idea what they're talking about.
We're visiting with the lady that I believe is the most important voice in coverage of this January 6th episode, Julie Kelly. Get her on Substack, Declassified with Julie Kelly. President Trump has got a calculation here that this will be sort of a short-lived escapade. I think that calculation is correct. People aren't obsessed with it, but nonetheless, his critics are going to use this as a tool, as a weapon. They're going to try to bludgeon him with this over and over again. But I think even they kind of dry up and go away, don't they?
Well, I think they do. And I think these Republican senators who are speaking out about this, Thomas Tillis, for example, who's up for re-election next year, Lisa Murkowski, of course, always can depend on her for criticizing the president, even people like Mike Rounds. Look, what's really shameful to hear these Republican senators is that this has happened to their own constituents. They have sat in silence while this DOJ, Joe Biden's DOJ, and Chris Wray's FBI has gone on this crusade of terror across the country, mostly nonviolent misdemeanor offenses. And they've said nothing until now. And now they're worried about people being unfairly charged and prosecuted with assaulting police officers when they couldn't even tell you one case except the talking points that the former DOJ spinmeisters are sending out. Really shameful that they have allowed this to go on and now criticizing them. So they will be hopefully held accountable by their own voters. But Mike, also the entire J6 narrative unraveling. I think there will be a separate investigation into January 6th. We will finally get answers as to how many FBI informants and undercover employees from other law enforcement agencies were involved. What happened to the pipe bomber? Who was that person? And what happened to all the missing Secret Service texts that were deleted after January 6th that were never recovered? Why were they purged? Why were they never recovered? And what did they say about what was happening leading up to January 6th and on that day?
You know, we used to believe in the concept the punishment needs to fit the crime. And, of course, that went right out the window with all the hysteria because, of course, the left and the Democrats used January 6th as a political weapon. They politicized the whole thing. And thankfully, common sense prevails. And, look, Julie Kelly, you're a national treasure. I'm so grateful to you for your work. Always great. I know how busy you are, and I want to thank you. I hope everybody follows you on Substack, Declassified with Julie Kelly. I say this to all the guests I like, but I sure mean it with you in particular, right out of the Bible. Julie, keep fighting the good fight. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Mike. Will do.
All right, so the media is freaking out about the January 6th pardons and commutations. And that Scott Jennings nails it over on CNN. I mean, of course, you've got Jamie Raskin. He's come up with a theory. Trump wants an army, a reserve army of insurrectionists. That's the reason. that's the reason he pardoned so many of them. Was it 1,500, 1,600? This is hysterical. Check out Jamie Raskin on where else? CNN.
The question is, why are they being released? Are they being released as a reserve army of political foot soldiers to act on behalf of MAGA and Donald Trump? And I think that's what's so profoundly troubling to a majority of the American people who rejected the idea of freeing at least the violent criminals and the ones who are convicted of seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow the government.
Jamie Raskin, he's the gift that just keeps on giving. All you can do is laugh at these clowns. They're such clowns. But, you know, Scott Jennings nailed it. Do we have the Scott Jennings clip that you guys played in the liner? I don't see it on the cut sheet. Because he's right. These people's lives were ruined. They did lose everything. They have been to prison. Every one of them. How long do you want them to be in prison? Tell me. I'm all ears. What's the proper punishment? What's the proper punishment? I mean, here's an exchange between Abby Phillips and Scott Jennings on CNN. And look, I get the criticism. Last week, J.D. Vance said, of course we shouldn't pardon or sentences of people who committed acts of violence. And it appears that some of the people who were violent on that day got a commutation or a pardon. I guess, I don't know. I mean, I think it remains to be seen. But listen to this exchange on CNN between Abby Phillips, the CNN person, and the great Scott Jennings.
Don't you think there's a substantive difference between those two things? One of them was trying to overturn an election.
I mean, I'll answer.
You don't think there's a difference between trying to overturn an election and violent social justice protests?
Social justice. Okay.
I mean,
I'll
give it to you, Scott. Let's say that they're violent. You don't think there's a difference between trying to obstruct the peaceful transfer of power
here's what I think.
And violent riots in the street of any kind? The ones in 1968, the ones in 2020.
I think both groups of people were mad about something going on. They wanted to change it. They took matters into their own hands that they should not have done. In both cases, you had people engaging in activities that they should not have engaged in. Now, our culture and our public discourse decided one group of people, social justice is good, and these people were bad. But the reality is they had the same motivation.
Here's the thing.
They all did the same thing.
I mean, he's so right. Why in the world, Abby Phillips is suggesting if you burn down a McDonald's or assault a cop because a black guy named George Floyd died, that's okay. But if you are upset about an election and you're in Washington, D.C., and you break a window, go to jail for 100 years. And Scott Jennings says one wrong doesn't justify the other. Here's Arthur Idala, a friend of mine, a lawyer from New York City, also appearing on CNN. And, he makes the same point. How do you justify the BLM riots and then express righteous indignation when Trump says, all right, enough is enough. These people have been in jail for years. Let them go.
There were people in protests. They were not riots. They were protests. And there were people who showed up at the protest and did bad behavior. But that was because a man was murdered unjustly.
That doesn't give you the right to break into the Nike store. That doesn't give you the right to break into Tiffany's.
How about you let me finish?
I mean, what a great point that, a man was murdered. So there were people, see the mindset of the loony left? That's why they're upset. They're perfectly fine with white Trump supporters rotting in jail forever for the rest of their lives, and they're perfectly fine with people of color who rioted over George Floyd. That's different to them. And Scott Jennings' point is, it's the same thing. You don't get to take matters into your own hands. You don't get to riot, whatever the reason. And the punishment should be equitable. The punishment should be the same. If you assault a cop, it shouldn't matter if you're doing it. Your motivation doesn't matter. You assaulted a cop. So if there's no punishment for assaulting a cop over George Floyd, then the punishment for the January 6ers has been quite enough. They've already been in jail for years.